Mayday! Mayday! Egypt Air 990. We are in an emergency descent. The voice crackles through the static-filled radio transmission at 1:50 a.m. on October 31, 1999, as the Boeing 767 plunges through the darkness of the Atlantic Ocean 33 minutes after departing John F. Kennedy International Airport. In the cockpit of what should have been a routine overnight flight to Cairo, a chilling scene unfolds that would forever change our understanding of aviation security and human psychology at 37,000 feet. Tonight, we dive into one of the most controversial and haunting disasters in commercial aviation history, where the investigation would reveal secrets darker than the October night that claimed 217 innocent lives. The aircraft itself was a testament to modern engineering excellence, a Boeing 767-300ER bearing the registration SU gap, delivered fresh to Egypt Air in September 1989. This twin-engine wide-body had accumulated over 36,000 flight hours across a decade of faithful service, connecting continents with the reliability that made it a backbone of international aviation. Her Pratt & Whitney engines hummed with mechanical precision, and every system aboard had been meticulously maintained according to the strictest international standards. The 767 had earned its reputation as one of the safest aircraft ever built, with advanced fly-by-wire systems and redundant safety mechanisms that had prevented countless potential disasters. On this Halloween Eve, however, all the engineering brilliance in the world would prove powerless against the human element that aviation experts had long considered the most unpredictable variable in flight safety. Captain Ahmed El-Habashi commanded the flight deck with the quiet confidence of a pilot who had logged over 14,000 hours navigating the skies between Egypt and destinations across the globe. At 57 years old, he embodied the experience and professionalism that passengers trusted implicitly when they stepped aboard his aircraft. His logbooks told the story of a career devoted to aviation excellence, with an impeccable safety record that had earned him respect among his peers at Egypt Air. Beside him, First Officer Adel Anwar brought his own substantial experience to the cockpit, a skilled aviator who had proven himself countless times in the demanding environment of international commercial aviation. The cockpit crew also included Captain Rauf Noureldan, an experienced pilot deadheading back to Cairo, adding another layer of aviation expertise to what should have been a textbook transatlantic crossing. The passenger manifest read like a cross-section of humanity seeking to bridge continents through the miracle of modern flight. Families returning home to Egypt after visiting relatives in America settled into their seats with the excited chatter of loved ones sharing stories and planning reunions. Business travelers opened laptops and organized documents for meetings that would now never take place, their professional ambitions cut short by the tragedy that awaited. Tourists clutched guidebooks filled with dreams of exploring ancient pyramids and bustling Cairo markets, their excitement palpable as they anticipated their first glimpse of the land of the pharaohs. Among them sat 33 Egyptian military officers returning from training exercises in the United States, their presence adding a diplomatic dimension to what would become an international incident of unprecedented complexity. The departure from JFK proceeded with mechanical precision as Egypt Air 990 pushed back from Gate 19 at Terminal 4 precisely on schedule. The massive Pratt & Whitney engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, generating the tremendous thrust needed to lift 373,000 pounds of aircraft, fuel, cargo, and human dreams into the October night sky. New York's skyline glittered beneath them as the 767 climbed steadily through the busy airspace surrounding one of the world's most congested airports, following air traffic control vectors that would soon point them northeast toward the open Atlantic. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a long-haul flight as passengers adjusted their seats. Flight attendants began their service preparations, and the cockpit crew established their cruise routine for what everyone believed would be an uneventful 7-hour journey to Cairo International Airport. At 1:20 a.m. Eastern Time, approximately 30 minutes after takeoff, Captain El-Habashi made the decision to leave the cockpit for a brief rest period, a common practice on long-haul flights that allows the primary crew to remain fresh for the demanding approach and landing phases. First Officer Anwar assumed command of the aircraft as it maintained its assigned altitude of 33,000 feet, cruising at Mach 0.86 through the smooth air, typical of late-night transatlantic flights. The cabin had settled into the quiet hum of overnight travel, with most passengers either sleeping or quietly reading as they crossed the invisible boundary between American and international waters. In the cockpit, the relief pilot who had taken Captain El-Habashi's seat maintained radio contact with air traffic control, acknowledging routine position reports and weather updates that painted a picture of perfect flying conditions ahead. What happened next would become the subject of intense investigation, international controversy, and endless debate among aviation experts, government officials, and families seeking answers to questions that seemed to defy logical explanation. At 1:48 a.m., the cockpit voice recorder captured sounds that would chill investigators to their core as they attempted to reconstruct the final moments of EgyptAir 990. The first sign of trouble came not from mechanical failure or external threat, but from within the cockpit itself, where a series of actions began that would send the aircraft into a catastrophic dive from which it would never recover. The flight data recorder, that black box of truth that aviation investigators depend upon to solve the puzzles of disaster, began recording parameters that defied every principle of normal flight operations. Tawakkaltu ala Allah, Arabic words meaning I rely on God, were captured by the cockpit voice recorder in the moments before EgyptAir 990 began its fatal descent. The aircraft's autopilot disengaged, whether by deliberate action or system failure, and the massive Boeing 767 began a steep dive that would accelerate to nearly the speed of sound. In the passenger cabin, the sudden change from level flight to precipitous descent would have created chaos as unsecured objects became projectiles and human bodies pressed against seatbelts with forces that defied comprehension. The structural stress on the airframe increased exponentially as the aircraft approached its design limits, with wings and fuselage experiencing loads that pushed the boundaries of engineering tolerances. Captain El-Habashi rushed back to the cockpit as alarms blared throughout the aircraft, finding his command in a state of emergency that no amount of training could have fully prepared him to handle. The altimeter unwound with terrifying speed as the aircraft plummeted through cloud layers that had been peaceful cruise altitude just moments before. His attempts to regain control of the aircraft created a battle in the cockpit between opposing control inputs, with the flight data recorder capturing the mechanical confusion as different pilots attempted to influence the aircraft's trajectory. The 767's fly-by-wire systems, designed to prevent pilot error and protect the aircraft from dangerous flight regimes, found themselves caught between conflicting commands that pushed the sophisticated computers beyond their programming parameters. At 22,000 feet, the structural integrity of EgyptAir 990 began to fail under the extreme aerodynamic forces generated by its high-speed dive. The aircraft had exceeded its maximum operating velocity by a significant margin, entering flight regimes that Boeing engineers had never intended the 767 to experience. Metal fatigue and structural failure propagated through the airframe as components designed for normal flight operations encountered loads that exceeded their design specifications by orders of magnitude. The wings, those elegant structures that had carried the aircraft safely across thousands of previous flights, began to separate from the fuselage as the fundamental laws of physics overwhelmed human engineering. In the final seconds of the flight, radar controllers at air traffic control centers along the eastern seaboard watched in horror as the radar return from EgyptAir 990 accelerated downward at a rate that defied explanation. The aircraft had become a falling object rather than a controlled vehicle, subject to gravity and aerodynamics in ways that commercial aviation had never intended to experience. The impact with the Atlantic Ocean occurred at approximately 1:52 a.m., just 4 minutes after the emergency began, creating a debris field that would challenge investigators for months as they attempted to reconstruct the sequence of events from fragments scattered across 60 miles of ocean floor. The investigation that followed would become one of the most contentious and politically charged aviation inquiries in history, involving not just the National Transportation Safety Board and Egyptian civil aviation authorities, but also the Federal Bureau of Investigation and diplomatic representatives from both nations. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, recovered from the ocean floor after an extensive search operation, contained evidence that pointed toward deliberate action rather than mechanical failure or external interference. However, the interpretation of this evidence would create a diplomatic crisis between the United States and Egypt, with each nation's investigators reaching dramatically different conclusions about the cause of the tragedy. The Egyptian investigation team, led by seasoned aviation professionals with decades of experience in accident reconstruction, maintained that mechanical failure must have precipitated the emergency that led to the loss of control. They argued that elevator malfunction or other flight control problems could have created the conditions that resulted in the catastrophic dive, pointing to previous incidents in aviation history where similar mechanical failures had led to loss of aircraft control. Their analysis focused on the possibility that the aircraft's flight control systems had malfunctioned in ways that created an unrecoverable situation, despite the heroic efforts of the flight crew to regain control of their aircraft. The American investigators, however, reached a conclusion that sent shockwaves through the international aviation community and strained diplomatic relations between longtime allies. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the evidence pointed toward deliberate action by the relief first officer, suggesting that the tragedy of EgyptAir 990 represented not mechanical failure, but intentional destruction of the aircraft and everyone aboard. This conclusion, based on analysis of the flight data recorder parameters and cockpit voice recorder transcripts, suggested a scenario too horrific for many to accept, that a trusted aviation professional had deliberately caused the deaths of 216 innocent people. The families of the victims found themselves caught in the crossfire of international politics and conflicting investigative conclusions, their grief compounded by the uncertainty surrounding the loss of their loved ones. Egyptian families rejected the American findings, viewing them as an attack on their national honor and professional aviation community. American families struggled to understand how such a tragedy could occur within the highly regulated and safety-focused environment of commercial aviation. The diplomatic tensions created by the investigation's conclusions would persist for years, affecting cooperation between American and Egyptian aviation authorities and creating lasting scars in the relationship between the two nations. Beyond the political controversy, the tragedy of EgyptAir 990 forced the aviation industry to confront uncomfortable questions about crew psychological screening, cockpit security, and the human factors that could potentially threaten flight safety. Airlines around the world began implementing enhanced screening procedures for flight crew members, recognizing that technical proficiency alone might not be sufficient to identify individuals who could pose a threat to aviation safety. The concept of cockpit resource management expanded to include protocols for identifying and addressing potential psychological stressors that might affect crew performance and decision-making during critical phases of flight. The technical lessons learned from the investigation led to improvements in aircraft design and flight data monitoring systems that would benefit the entire aviation industry. Boeing incorporated enhanced flight envelope protection systems in future aircraft designs, making it more difficult for pilots to exceed critical flight parameters even under extreme circumstances. Airlines began implementing real-time flight data monitoring programs that could identify unusual flight patterns or crew behaviors before they escalated into safety threats, creating an additional layer of protection for passengers and crew members. The human cost of EgyptAir 990 extended far beyond the 217 lives lost in the Atlantic Ocean that October night, touching thousands of family members, friends, colleagues, and community members whose lives were forever changed by the tragedy. Children lost parents who would never return home from business trips or family vacations, leaving behind empty chairs at dinner tables and unfulfilled promises of bedtime stories and weekend adventures. Parents buried children whose dreams and aspirations were cut short by a disaster that defied comprehension, their futures erased in the span of 4 minutes above the dark waters of the Atlantic. The investigation's controversial conclusions created a legacy of uncertainty that continues to affect aviation safety discussions and international cooperation in accident investigation. The disagreement between American and Egyptian investigators highlighted the challenges of conducting objective accident investigations in an environment of cultural differences, political pressures, and emotional trauma. Aviation safety experts continue to debate the lessons learned from EgyptAir 990, with some arguing that the focus should remain on technical improvements to aircraft systems, and others emphasizing the need for enhanced crew screening and psychological evaluation procedures. For those who knew and worked with the crew members of Egypt Air 990, the tragedy represented not just the loss of colleagues, but the destruction of professional reputations built over decades of dedicated service to aviation safety. The questioning of crew actions and motivations created lasting pain for families and co-workers who remembered these individuals as skilled professionals and caring human beings. The complexity of human psychology and the limitations of accident investigation techniques meant that definitive answers to some questions might never be found, leaving room for doubt and continuing controversy. The wreckage of Egypt Air 990 remains on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, a tomb for 217 souls whose lives ended far from home in the darkness of a October night. The aircraft that had faithfully served passengers for over a decade became the focal point of one of aviation's most controversial investigations, its black boxes revealing data that challenged investigators to confront the darkest possibilities of human nature within the trusted environment of commercial aviation. The Boeing 767, scattered across miles of ocean floor, serves as a reminder that even the most sophisticated safety systems and rigorous training programs cannot eliminate all risks from the complex interaction between human psychology and mechanical systems at 37,000 feet. Today, as we remember the victims of Egypt Air 990, we honor not only their individual lives, but also their collective contribution to aviation safety through the lessons learned from this tragedy. The improvements in crew screening, aircraft design, and flight monitoring systems that resulted from their loss have undoubtedly prevented other potential disasters, creating a lasting legacy of enhanced safety for future generations of air travelers. Their memory lives on in every enhanced safety protocol, every improved aircraft system, and every successful flight that benefits from the hard-learned lessons of October 31st, 1999. The story of Egypt Air 990 reminds us that aviation safety requires constant vigilance, continuous improvement, and the courage to confront difficult questions even when the answers challenge our assumptions about human nature and professional integrity. As we continue to push the boundaries of aviation technology and expand global air transportation networks, we must remember that the human element remains both the greatest asset and the most complex challenge in ensuring the safety of commercial aviation. The 217 souls aboard Egypt Air 990 deserve nothing less than our continued commitment to learning from their tragedy and working tirelessly to prevent similar losses in the future. If this story has moved you to think differently about aviation safety or the complex investigations that follow aviation disasters, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of the events that have shaped modern aviation. Share your thoughts in the comments below about the challenges investigators face when trying to determine the causes of aviation accidents and how the aviation industry can continue to improve safety while respecting the memory of those who have been lost. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light, ensuring that the lessons learned from tragedies like Egypt Air 990 continue to benefit aviation safety for years to come.